The General Hospital spoilers for Thursday, July 3rd state that Maxie Jones will experience a double stunner, while Dante Falconeri decides to confront Jason Morgan. Emma Scorpio Drake will also force Rocco Falconeri to the truth. So let's talk about what's next in Port Charles. Willow Tate will appear at the Metro Court pool just as Wiley Corinthos begins his swimming class. Although Willow will most likely arrange this, Michael Corinthos will block her attempts to reunite with their kid. Despite Willow's attempt at a bonding session, Michael will advise her not to add to Wiley's bewilderment and pain right now. Things have already been rough for Wiley, so Michael does not want Willow to cause a scene and complicate matters. Over with Maxie, she'll receive some beautiful deception upgrades. Brooklyn Quartermain appears to be informing Maxie about Sonny Corinthos' questionable investment, as well as the tragic overdose of Natalia Ramirez. Lulu Spencer will then speak with Laura Collins on the mob violence that is poised to escalate in Port Charles. Lulu may worry if Laura is willing to stand up to Sonny, given that he is part of the problem. While Lulu questions Laura and offers advice, Dante will question Jason. Dante seemed to be concerned about the persons responsible for the tavern fire, and whether they are still alive at this point. Should I keep looking, or are they buried in the woods? Dante asks Jason in Thursday's JH teaser video. Jason may admit that he hasn't caught up with the perpetrators yet. As a result, Dante may pressure Jason to let the cops handle it, though Jason will undoubtedly obey Sonny's orders instead. Jen Sidwell left a trail linking Selena Wu's staff to the pub fire and exiled her, at least until he could permanently remove Sonny. However, Sonny and Jason might not be that easily duped. Despite Sidwell's attempt to shift blame to Selena, Jason and Sonny may be able to see through his stunt. It may not matter now because Sidwell is so upset over Natalia's death and Marco Rios' anguish. Sidwell may launch another attack in reprisal, resulting in the full-blown mob feud foreseen by Lucas Jones. Tracy Quartermain will do everything she can to keep Giovanni Gio Palmieri away from Sonny, warning him that his life is in danger. Sonny will sidestep ADA Justine Turner's queries at the police station and refuse to take her word for it. This is especially true for any plea deals that ADA Turner may seek. On another side, there may be some conflict between Trina Robinson and Kai Taylor. Since Trina will issue a warning, it might be another one about Drew Kane. If Trina discovers that Kai gave Drew the heads up about Curtis Ashford's Jacinda scheme, it could be a deal-breaker. Meanwhile, Emma will provide some counsel to Rocco as he disputes something with Danny Morgan. Because Rocco will undoubtedly be interested in the file bearing his name and Brooke Lynn's research, Emma will believe it is critical to investigate the entire story. According to General Hospital spoilers, Rocco is about to make some terrible discoveries about Britt Westbourne and the stolen embryos, so stay tuned. Gio hadn't felt this uneasy in a while. There had been plenty of times recently when his world felt like it was slowly unraveling, but now it felt like the threads had all come free at once. Sonny's incarceration, his own conflict of allegiance, the peculiar tension between Brooke Lynn and Dante, and now hints of something sinister lurking beneath the surface. He could feel the weight of eyes on him, not just protecting ones from family, but also calculating ones from foes. He did not inform anyone about the note. It had been slid under his door late at night, and signed in threatening, "You are not safe. Keep an eye on your back." Gio had been staring at it for quite some time, divided between crumpling it up and ringing Dante. But in the end he said nothing and simply folded it and slipped it inside his wallet, like a secret talisman, reminding him not to let his guard down. Things between Dante and Jason were quickly disintegrating. Dante had grown increasingly skeptical of Jason since Sonny's incarceration and the organization's apparent split. It wasn't just the cop in him anymore, it was personal. He couldn't understand why Jason was making unilateral decisions, separating himself from Michael, protecting Drew, and bringing Gio closer to deadly missions. Dante had been waiting, wanting to trust that Jason was doing everything he could for the family, but now he wasn't so sure. Jason met Dante's look with the calm stoicism he'd honed over the years, but there was a rare spark of defensiveness behind it. "Joe's fine," Jason remarked, his tone level. "He's learning what it means to survive." "He's not a soldier," Dante responded. "He is barely an adult. You can say this is about teaching him strength, but you are dragging him into something he is not prepared for. And you are aware of this. He needs to know how to protect himself." "From whom?" You? Dante did not wait for a response. I don't care how much Sunny trusted you. I'm watching everything you do, Jason. You're treading a tight line. Jason did not flinch. He simply remained there, arms crossed, allowing the tension to develop between them. He was not going to defend himself. Not to Dante. Not when he knew things Dante didn't. About Drew, Michael, and the web of betrayal that had become so thick that Jason wasn't sure he could disentangle it. But Gio was becoming a liability. Not because he was weak, but because he had not yet learned the laws of this life. And people began to notice. Emma Scorpio has her own reasons for constantly monitoring Gio. She hadn't intended to get involved in any of it. She had come back to Port Charles expecting her time here to be brief, largely family-focused, and a momentary stop before the next stage of her career. But when she saw Rocco, the same aching returned. They had a history, not romantic but deep-rooted and unresolved. And Rocco? He was looking for answers far more than he let on. Emma saw it in his eyes. Rocco had always sought the truth. About Lulu, his place in the falconry legacy, and the expectations that come with being Dante's father and Sunny's grandfather. But he'd recently been skeptical. Something wasn't adding up. Why did Gio always appear to be in the midst of chaos? Why did Brooklyn suddenly become so secretive? Why did Jason keep dragging ropes out of the shadows? And why did Dante appear more exhausted than ever, as if he was carrying too much guilt to bear? Emma pushed him gently at first, then more directly. You have to stop pretending you're not curious, she murmured, her gaze fixed on his. There's something going on and you know it. Rocco raked his hand through his hair, irritated. It isn't so straightforward, Emma. These people, my father, Jason, do what they believe is right. They do not explain it. They simply expect us to comply. Are you cool with that? No, he replied gently. But I don't know what else to do. She handed him a photograph. It was blurry, a screen grab from a film, but unmistakable. Gio chatting to a man in a dark alley, the timestamp just 2 days before the most recent firefight on the docks. I didn't want to believe it either, she explained. But he's gone further than he's telling you. And someone will get hurt. The revelation hit Rocco like a blow in the stomach. Gio had been lying, or at the very least hiding. Perhaps he thought he was protecting them. Perhaps he truly believed he was helpful. But if he was meeting with individuals like that, or if he was already in the crosshairs, time was running out. Brooklyn had her suspicions, but her hands were tied. She didn't have the energy to keep a close eye on Gio full-time between her work with deception and attempting to keep the family together. But she knew something was wrong. His attitude had evolved. His nights out were growing later, and he was asking inappropriate questions. It reminded her too much of her own wild phase, the one that nearly killed her. She did not want that for Gio. She confronted Jason at the Metro Court, lowering her voice but not her rage. You're using him, she alleged. Don't deny it. I'm protecting him. You do not get to redefine what that means. If you truly intended to protect him, you would keep him out of this situation. But instead, you have him acting like a junior mobster, while everyone thinks everything is normal. Jason did not argue. He simply looked aside, telling Brooklyn everything she needed to know. He did not have a response. Or perhaps he did, but it was too unpleasant to utter out. Meanwhile, Gio began to feel the pressure. He knew Emma had figured it out. She was too clever not to. And Rocco was distant, as if he wasn't sure whether to trust him or go. The most hazardous aspect, however, was Joe's inability to identify his opponents. The guy in the alley had informed him that 2 factions were growing in Port Charles. One loyal to Jason and the other secretly supporting Drew. Was there a message under his door? It was probably connected. He struggled to hold it together. Smiled at the right moments and said the right things. But within he was spiraling. What if he's simply a pawn? What if Jason used him as leverage against Dante? What if Sunny's arrest marked simply the beginning? Emma discovered him on the pier, staring out at the water as if it contained the answers. You're in trouble, she replied without preface. Everyone is, Gio responded, not looking at her. I am not talking about everyone. I am talking about you. You're lying to individuals who are willing to die for you. He turned to her, finally meeting her gaze. I didn't ask them to. That doesn't mean you get to betray them. The words weighed heavily between them. Gio didn't reply since he couldn't argue. She was correct. He had started along this path believing that he could balance both lives. Legacy and future, loyalty and freedom. But it didn't work that way. In Port Charles, every decision had consequences. There was always someone observing. Later that night, a shot was fired outside Kelly's. Nobody was wounded, but the message was clear. Gio wasn't secure, not from outsiders, and perhaps not even from his own circle. Dante was the first on the scene, revolver drawn and eyes scanning for any dangers. When he noticed Gio standing frozen nearby, he ran over to check for injuries. "Have you been hit?" he exclaimed. Gio shook his head and took weak breaths. "No. Just I couldn't see where it came from." Dante's hand trembled just slightly. "You are done with Jason." "I don't care what he said. You're done." For the first time, Gio did not argue. Jason arrived a few minutes later, accompanied by Brick. He was cool and calculated, immediately assessing the shot's angle, trajectory, and potential suspects. But when his eyes met Dante's, he declared a silent war. "You knew this would happen," Dante yelled. "You put him in the line of fire." Jason did not answer. He did not need to. His silence was admission enough. Emma and Rocco arrived together, both pale and angry. Rocco instantly ran to Gio and grabbed his shoulders. "You have to tell me everything," he stated. "No more secrets." Gio nodded slowly. "Okay. However, once you know, you can't pretend this place is straightforward." "Nothing about it is." Emma watched them, her eyes full with concern. She had hoped that returning to Port Charles would provide her with some clarity and perhaps closure. But it had only served to remind her that the truth was constantly tangled here, and safety was never assured. Brooklyn arrived last, panic barely hidden by sarcasm. She embraced Gio tightly and murmured, "You only have one life, kid. Don't waste it trying to be like them." But Gio didn't know who them was anymore. Everyone had blood on their hands, some physical, some figurative. And now that his life was under peril, and lines were being drawn in the sand, he knew he had to make a decision. Stay loyal to Jason and hope the storm passes, or break away, knowing full well that individuals who attempted to flee this world rarely made very far. One thing was certain. There was no more faking. The threat was real. The truths were harsh. What about the future? It was a battleground. The General Hospital recap for Wednesday, July 2nd, shows that Selena Wu was warned to leave Port Charles following Jen Sidwell's frame-up, while Sonny Corinthos decided on an eye-for-an-eye retribution during a strategy session with Jason Morgan. Sidwell invited Selena to Windmere, warning her that she was about to go to battle with Sonny. The firebombing at Charlie's pub was linked to Selena's associates, so she understood she'd been set up. Selena protested that she could just tell Sonny about Sidwell's scheme, but he feared Sonny would kill her before she had a chance. Furthermore, Sidwell hinted that Sonny will eventually unearth even damning evidence against her. Sidwell urged Selena to leave town, assuring her that she could return to a better PC once Sonny had been dealt with completely. Alexis Davis was upset by Christina Corinthos Davis' situation and struggled to do her duties at GH, but she was relieved to see Molly Lansing Davis connecting with her sister in her hospital bed. Meanwhile, Marco Rios grieved over Natalia Ramirez's body before joining Lucas Jones, Anna Devane, and Harrison Chase. That prompted some discussion concerning Natalia's apparent overdose, as well as Marco's inquiry about whether it was accidental or purposeful. Marco learned about Natalia seeking Sonny out during the christening and eventually accused Sonny of murder. Marco didn't have proof, but he thought it was apparent. Lucas stopped Marco from revealing that he knew of Natalia's plot to exit the country, and Marco thanked him personally. After Sonny's henchman was recorded on the security camera outside Natalia's hotel suite, Anna intimated that it was bad news for Sonny. At Sonny's residence, he discussed with Jason his plans for responding to the Charlie's pub attack. Sonny felt Sidwell was to blame and demanded retribution. Sonny thought his daughter had been targeted, so he suggested Sidwell's kid deserved the same. Jason pointed out that Marco had just saved Christina, but Sonny was okay with Marco becoming collateral damage. After then, Anna arrived with updates on Natalia's death and took Sonny in for interrogation because he was now a subject of interest. While Marco was being evaluated at the hospital, Lucas called Sidwell and informed him of Natalia's death. Sidwell dashed over to console Marco, and was stunned to find that Marco had put his own life in danger by running into the fire at the tavern. Marco pointed out that he saved Sonny's daughter while Sonny was responsible for him losing his mother. That left Sidwell wondering how Sonny was connected to Natalia's tragic demise. At the Quartermain home, Brooke Lynn Quartermain informed Tracy Quartermain about Sonny's shady deception investment. Thus Tracy wanted to turn over proof to the detectives. Chase arrived and told Christina about the fire and Natalia's death. Tracy was determined to keep Giovanni Gio Palmieri away from Sonny since he was unsafe to be around. Emma Scorpio Drake was at a cafe with Outback the dog when she urged Gio to reconsider dropping out of PCU. Joe's heart wasn't in music anymore, but she hoped he'd change his mind by September or find something else to pursue. Emma eventually mentioned Professor Henry Hank Dalton's lab, and how they might have to go to extreme lengths to get inside, so Gio assumed she meant doing something criminal. Back with Lucas, he questioned Elizabeth Baldwin about Natalia's overdose, fearing a mafia war was looming. It would divide Lucas' family on one side and Marco's on the other. Outside Charlie's pub, Jocelyn Jacks went on a Sonny-related tirade, admitting to Vaughn that he was one of the reasons she took this job. Vaughn recognized Jocelyn intended to climb the WSB ladder and bring Sonny down, therefore he thought it was a fair goal. Vaughn advised telling Jocelyn about his own objective in joining the WSB once they got to know one another better. Vaughn unexpectedly drew Jocelyn into a makeout session with no one else around, so it wasn't just for show anymore. According to General Hospital spoilers, Jocelyn and Vaughn's relationship may get nasty in the coming weeks, so stay tuned. Selena Wu's departure from Port Charles wasn't without effects. Tensions between her and Sonny Corinthos had been building for weeks, simmering slowly and deliberately. Initially, there were backstage meetings, polite discussions, and coded warnings. However, those meetings evolved into veiled threats which ultimately to action. Selena believed she had outmaneuvered Sonny. She had gained confidence in her reach, smug in her idea that Sonny had softened since his return from Nixon Falls. But she underestimated Sonny's willingness to go to extreme lengths when someone crossed a line, which she did more than once. Selena's most recent shift was not just business-related, but also personal. She had attempted to spread her influence further into the Corinthian areas by quietly purchasing up fronts and utilizing a succession of dummy corporations to conceal her rising power. When she started attacking Sonny's supporters, everything changed. Gladys was the first to reveal her hand. Desperate and haughty, she uttered Selena's name too many times. And with that, the fog lifted. Sonny started to connect the dots. He recognized that the gambling debts Selena had agreed to discharge for so many people were not favors but chains. Curtis presented some of the most frightening evidence. Though he had his own tangled relationship with Selena, especially considering her silent ownership in the Savoy, Curtis had grown tired of her manipulations. He started maintaining records after she began using his nightclub to launder money, first gently, then shamelessly. He wasn't ready to confront the authorities, but he had no trouble giving Sonny information. Came at a price, of course. Curtis understood that once Sonny had what he wanted, the balance of power would shift irrevocably. And it did. Sonny noticed more than just territorial aggressiveness. Selena had participated in a hit. A modest, cautious one but a success nonetheless. A low-level colleague of Sonny's, someone loyal, never getting his hands dirty, had been discovered dead behind a warehouse on the docks. First it was ruled an accident, but Sonny's guys dug deeper. The evidence led back to Selena. Maybe she didn't order the hit directly, but she was aware of it. She approved it. She viewed the man as disposable, just a pawn in her rise. That was the last straw. Sonny did not act immediately. He sat with the information. He was watching. He let her believe she was safe. He led her to assume her veil of invincibility was still intact. Meanwhile, he quietly began regaining his area, cutting her out of the agreement she'd worked her way into. He even made inroads into the gambling circles she ruled over. Selena began to feel a shift. Her usual informants remained mute. Meetings were postponed. Her deliveries were intercepted. She was getting squeezed. Then came the direct message. A little package left on the steps to her hotel suite. Inside was the bracelet worn by the deceased associate, cleaned, polished, and tucked within black velvet. There's nothing else. Selena understood immediately what it meant. Sunny had discovered out, and she knew what would happen next. She attempted to make one final power play. She called Sunny to a meeting under the premise of negotiating. She wore her finest silk gown, lighted the room with soft lanterns and served excellent scotch. But Sunny was not there for show. He listened to her pitch, hearing her offer a new partnership that would benefit both sides. He let her to speak. When she finished, he stood slowly, straightened his jacket, and leaned in. "You took something from me," he added gently. "Do you think that will go unanswered?" Selena did not flinch. "It was business." "That's where you're wrong," Sunny said. "It was personal." He went away, leaving behind his untouched glass of scotch. Since then, Selena's stay in Port Charles has been counted in hours rather than days. Her resources started to disappear overnight. The bank accounts she relied on were frozen. Key allies abandoned her, citing fear, perplexity, or worse, new loyalty to Corinthos. The Savoy no longer welcomed her people. Curtis officially ended her quiet collaboration. Even the mayor's office, which has usually remained neutral in such matters, openly distanced themselves. Selena was being wiped. The final punch came from her enforcer, Mr. Lee, the man she trusted beyond all others, showed up at the hospital, beaten to within an inch of his life. Nobody saw who did it. Nobody said a thing. However, the message was clear. Selena was no longer protected. Not even her most devoted soldier could protect her now. Sunny did not kill her. He did not need to. For him, punishment was not about bloodshed, but about control, honor, and the old street customs. He was a firm believer in justice. And what Selena had taken could only be returned by taking something equally valuable. She has lost her power. She forgot her name. She lost Port Charles. By the time she boarded her private flight, flanked by only 2 bodyguards instead of 6, Selena appeared to be a shell of her former self rather than the fearsome Wu matriarch. She did not make a statement. She did not leave any threats behind. She simply vanished into the night sky, knowing that if she ever returned without Sunny's permission, she'd never get off the tarmac. But Sunny wasn't done yet. He used Selena's demise to send a message to those orbiting his kingdom. He paid quiet visits to other associates, re-establishing relationships, and reminded them of the boundaries that could not be crossed. He made it clear that disloyalty would not be tolerated. Power grabs would be punishable. Loyalty was not optional, it was required. In the weeks that followed there was peace, but it was the type that hung heavily in the air like a rainstorm about to break. The underworld of Port Charles had been rattled, and while Sunny appeared calm, even friendly in public, everyone knew he was still watching, still calculating. Diane warned him. She claimed that the manner he treated Selena could bring attention, not just from the FBI but also from other criminal organizations. Depending on how they perceived Selena's fall, they would see weakness or threat. Sunny listened but was not concerned. His message wasn't about power but about survival. The streets were not run with kindness. They were dominated by tradition, dread, and respect. And Sunny Corinthos possessed all 3 in abundance. However, there were consequences, ripples that had not yet reached the surface. Selena had connections outside Port Charles. She had obligations that she paid off with favors rather than money. She wielded power in places Sunny hadn't even touched. Even though she was gone, her network was not completely dissolved. There was a good chance she would regroup, reorganize, and strike back from a distance. However, Sunny was also prepared for that. He had personnel in position. His ears were on the ground. He was already planning 2 steps ahead. Meanwhile, those in Selena's sphere struggled to adjust. Brad Cooper, for one, felt the shift strongly. Though he hadn't been directly involved in her actions, he was aware that her presence provided him with some kind of safety. Without her, he felt vulnerable. However, he couldn't afford to show it. The hospital still had eyes, and the gossip spread quickly. Even Curtis, who helped bring Selena down, couldn't overcome his unease. He knew Sunny's brand of justice was both effective and cruel, and he had helped to make it possible. He kept wondering if he'd made the correct decision, if there could have been another option. But in the end he realized that Selena's grasp on his club, life, and city needed to be severed. Only Sunny could do it. Portia, who had kept a distance from everything, finally asked Curtis one night if he regretted anything. He did not respond at first. He simply poured himself a drink and gazed out the window at the city below, knowing that peace, true peace, was never permanent in Port Charles. Sonny resumed to his usual routines. Morning coffee on the deck. Evening stroll in the warehouse district. He said less and listened more. He didn't gloat over his success. He did not brag or remind people of what he had accomplished. That was not his way. But those who knew him noticed the steel behind his eyes. The silent warning stayed in his posture as he inspected every nook, corner, and shadow. Selena was gone, but her ghost remained. In whispers between bartenders. In the way the docks become silent at night. In the flash of lights at the Savoy. Her name used to mean something. Sonny had claimed her empire without extracting a single drop of her blood, reminding everyone why the Corinthos name was still important. It wasn't only about power. It wasn't simply fear. It was a legacy. And that kind of legacy does not vanish lightly. General Hospital spoilers for Thursday, July 3rd state that Willow Tate and Wiley Corinthos will have a pool encounter, prompting Michael Corinthos to intercede. Sonny Corinthos will also be questioned by PCPD, so let's get started and go over everything that happened. First, Lulu Spencer will speak with Laura Collins about how far she is willing to go to make that happen. Laura will undoubtedly want to avoid the escalating mob drama, but Lulu may wonder if she is willing to help take down Sonny as part of that plan. Michael will take Wiley to the Metro Court pool for his swimming lesson, but things will become uncomfortable when Willow arrives as well. Willow will want to spend time with her son, but Michael will advise her not to make things more difficult for Wiley than they need to be. Wiley is confused enough as it is, so Michael will get him out of there as quickly as possible. Emma Scorpio Drake will then offer guidance to Rocco Falconeri, while he sits with Danny Morgan. Emma will believe Rocco owes it to himself to find out the truth, which may include discussing Brooke Lynn Quartermain's file with his name on it. Brooke Lynn will share some awful news on Thursday's show. Maxie Jones will be surprised, so Brooke Lynn should enlighten her about their deception investment drama, as well as Natalia Ramirez's tragedy. Tracy Quartermain plans to pay Giovanni Gio Palmieri a visit at the pool. Tracy will claim that Joe's life is in danger and throw the accusation onto Sonny, but Gio may come to his defense. Sonny has been detained for questioning regarding Natalia's tragic death, so ADA Justine Turner will question him at the police station. It appears like Ada Turner will say Sonny is in serious trouble, and may try to persuade him to accept a plea offer. Ada Turner may act as like it is Sonny's best option, but he clearly does not trust her. Why should I take your word for it? Sonny asks Ada Turner in Thursday's preview video. Sonny may claim that he would be arrested if the cops had any evidence against him, and turn to Diane Miller for advice if things become complicated. Dante Falconeri will then meet with Jason Morgan to ask him a very critical question. Should I keep looking, or are they buried in the woods? Dante asks Jason in Thursday's preview clip. Dante appears to be on the lookout for the masked men who caused the fire, but he may be wondering if Jason beat him to the punch and killed the guys for good. Jen Sidwell has pulled in a handful of Selena Wu's pals and coerced her into a frame-up, but will Sonny and Jason believe what he is selling? Lucas Jones recently predicted a mob war between Sidwell and Sonny, thus it appears to be where this storyline is headed instead. Regardless, Jason may tell Dante that he hasn't found the fire starters yet. Finally, General Hospital spoilers indicate Trina Robinson will issue a warning to Kai Taylor.